The sensitive compartmented information facility on the fourth floor of the Regional Defense Coordination Center had no windows. This was by design. Windows meant exposure. Exposure meant vulnerability. And everything that happened inside room 412 was built on the foundational assumption that vulnerability was not an option anyone could afford. The room held 12 people on most days. Today, it held 13. The 13th was not on the access roster. She had arrived at 0730 with a building badge that passed the front scanner, a visitor credential that cleared the second checkpoint, and a quiet authority in her posture that communicated to anyone trained to read such things that she had been in rooms like this one before. Many rooms, many clearances, many conversations she was not supposed to be part of, but was, because someone further up the chain had decided her presence was necessary and had not always seen the need to explain that decision to the people directly below them. She carried a single manila folder, plain, no classification markings on the outside, no identifying labels. She sat against the left wall, one seat removed from the nearest workstation, close enough to hear everything, far enough to suggest she was not yet part of the conversation. The operation being planned inside room 412 was designated Cobalt Meridian. The name itself carried no meaning to anyone outside the 11 people currently cleared for it. That was the nature of special access programs. They existed in their own sealed atmosphere, separate from the standard classification universe of confidential, secret, and top secret. SAPs required something beyond clearance level. They required specific read-in, a deliberate decision made by authorized personnel that this particular person needed to know this particular program existed. The 11 people in the room had been read into Cobalt Meridian. She had not. At least that was what the access roster said. The operation coordinator was a man named Castellan, not his real name. Nobody in room 412 went by their real name during active planning cycles. He was methodical, precise, experienced in the particular way of people who have spent careers inside classified architectures, moving through layers of access, the way most people move through doors, one after another, each one requiring a key that not everyone carried. He ran the morning briefing with efficiency and minimal ceremony. Cobalt Meridian was, at its operational core, a cross-agency intelligence sharing framework, a mechanism by which 3 separate federal entities could pool specific categories of threat data without exposing the collection methodologies of any individual agency to the others. Elegant in concept, extraordinarily complex in execution. The framework had a protocol problem. Specifically, the authentication architecture at the center of the data-sharing mechanism was generating a recursive verification loop that effectively froze the entire system every time 2 agencies attempted to push conflicting data classifications into the same shared field simultaneously. The technical team had been working on it for 11 days. They had rebuilt the authentication layer twice. Both times the loop returned within 4 hours of deployment. The mission timeline was not flexible. The threat data that Cobalt Meridian was designed to synthesize was perishable. It had a window. The window was closing. We need the protocol architecture reviewed by someone who understands recursive SCI compartmentalization at the coding level, the technical lead said. His name, for the purposes of this room, was Harker, not a systems engineer, someone who's actually built compartmentalization frameworks inside SAP environments. Those people don't grow on trees, Castellan said. I know. Options. 2. We reach out to the original design team, which takes us through the contracting office, which takes 3 to 5 days for SAP clearance verification before they can even enter the building. Or, Harker paused. We find someone who's done this kind of architecture work independently, someone already cleared, already read in at the relevant compartment level. There are maybe 14 people in the country who fit that description, Castellan said. 12, she said. Every head turned. Not because she spoke loudly, because she had not spoken at all in the 2 hours since the briefing began. She had been sitting against the wall, folder on her knee, coffee cooling beside her boot, and the room had processed her as furniture. The particular kind of furniture that attends sensitive meetings and says nothing. Now she had said something. and what she had said was a correction. Castellan looked at her with the measured expression of a man who had not placed her in his own mental accounting of the room. 12. 14 assumes you're counting the DIA team that built the original Meridian compartment structure back in the architecture phase, she said. 2 of them are no longer read in. Their access was rolled back 18 months ago when the program restructured. So 12. Silence. The particular silence of people recalibrating. How do you know that? Harker asked. She looked at him calmly. Because I was one of the 14. What followed was not immediate acceptance. What followed was the entirely predictable response of a room full of people who had been operating inside a sealed environment and had just discovered that the seal had an occupant they hadn't accounted for. Castellan's reaction was professional and controlled, which is to say, it was sharp. You're not on the Cobalt Meridian access roster. No. This is a SAP facility. Access requires program-specific read-in. You don't have... Check the annex, she said. What annex? The one attached to the original program authorization document. Not the revised version from the restructure, the original. Castellan looked at his deputy. The deputy looked at the program security officer, a quiet, observant woman named Reyes, who had not spoken during the briefing, but who was now moving toward the filing cabinet in the corner of the room, with the deliberate pace of someone who had just realized she needed to look at something immediately. The filing cabinet required a separate key. Reyes had it. She used it. She retrieved a bound folder that was distinctly different from the operational binders on the central table. Older, the color of the binding slightly different, the classification markings on the spine indicating it predated the current program administration by at least 3 years. She opened it to the access annex, read it again, then looked up. Castellan. Her voice was careful. She's listed in the original program access authorization, founding architecture team, SAP read-in date is, Reyes checked the notation. 4 years ago, she's been on this program since before most of us were. The room absorbed this. Castellan looked at the woman against the wall. She looked back at him with the patient expression of someone who has had exactly this conversation before and knows precisely how long it takes to reach its conclusion. You're on the original architecture team, he said. Founding member, you helped design Cobalt Meridian. I designed the compartmentalization framework that Cobalt Meridian runs on, she said, the authentication architecture, the recursive SCI verification layer, the data push protocols for cross-agency classification synchronization. She paused. All of it. The technical lead, Harker, was staring at her with an expression that had transitioned from suspicion through recognition to something approaching genuine discomfort. The problem you've been trying to solve for 11 days, he said slowly. Yes. You know what it is. I know exactly what it is. I anticipated it during the original design phase. She opened the manila folder on her knee for the first time, removed a single document, placed it on the nearest workstation without standing from her chair. That's the corrective protocol. I wrote it 3 years ago. Nobody moved immediately. The document sat on the workstation like something that had been waiting a long time to be picked up. Harker reached it first. He read it with the focused attention of a man who had been trying to solve a problem for 11 days and was now looking at the solution written out in complete technical detail, annotated with the correction pathway mapped step by step. His expression moved through several stages. Concentration, recognition, the particular stillness of a person who has just encountered information that makes 11 days of frustration retroactively visible as completely unnecessary. This is the fix, he said. Not a question. Yes. How long does it take to implement? 4 hours. Maybe 3.5 if your deployment team is sharp. Why didn't the original design team? He stopped himself, looked at her. You said you anticipated this problem. During the architecture phase, yes. The recursive loop is an inherent vulnerability in any SCI compartmentalization system that attempts to synchronize conflicting classification fields across agency boundaries in real time. I flagged it in my final design review. We never saw a flag in the design review. No, she said simply. You wouldn't have. Castellan stepped forward. Why not? She looked at him with the composed directness of someone telling a truth they have been carrying for a long time and have finally been given the room to set down. Because the design review happened during the program restructure, she said. And when the program restructured, the administration changed. And the new administration reviewed my flag and made a determination that the recursive loop scenario was a theoretical edge case with low probability of occurring in operational conditions. She paused. I disagreed with that determination. I documented my disagreement. The documentation was filed under the original program authorization in the annex, where it has been sitting for 3 years, along with the corrective protocol. Castellan absorbed this. He was a careful man. He did not like surprises, and he had just encountered several in quick succession. But he was also experienced enough to recognize the difference between a security breach and a security failure, and what had just been revealed to him was definitively the latter. The program hadn't been compromised from outside. It had been limited from within by a decision made 3 years ago by people who had underestimated a flag that a founding architect had planted in precisely the right place. You've been watching us try to solve this, he said. I've been sitting in this room for 2 hours, yes. You could have said something when the briefing started. She looked at him steadily. I could have, she agreed. But 2 hours ago, you were going to tell me the operation was above my clearance and ask me to leave. You weren't going to check the annex until you had a reason to. And you didn't have a reason to until Harker said what he said about the authentication architecture. Castellan was quiet. I gave you the reason, she continued. Then I waited. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Reyes. Get the deployment team in here. The next 3.5 hours belonged entirely to the work. She moved to the central table, not invited, not announced, simply moving because the work required it, and the room had stopped organizing itself around the question of whether she belonged there. That question had been answered. What remained was the problem, and the problem was solvable, and she was the person who had written the solution. She walked the technical team through the corrective protocol with the patience and precision of someone who understood every layer of the system from its foundational logic outward. Not because she was showing off her knowledge, because the people implementing the fix needed to understand the reasoning behind each step, not just the steps themselves. A corrective protocol applied without understanding was a corrective protocol one misconfiguration away from creating a different problem. She made them understand. Harker asked questions that revealed genuine technical depth. She answered them completely. The deployment team asked implementation questions. She answered those too. Reyes, the program security officer, asked 2 questions about compartmentalization compliance that were sharp and specific and reflected a level of expertise that the room hadn't surfaced until this moment. She answered both precisely, then told Reyes that she had asked the right questions and that the compliance documentation was in the second section of the corrective protocol, where it had been placed deliberately so that security review wouldn't require a separate document trail. Reyes looked at the document, found the section, looked up. You designed this to be auditable. Every framework I've ever built has been auditable, she said. It's not a feature, it's the floor. At the 3-hour and 22-minute mark, the deployment team ran the corrective protocol against the live system. The recursive loop did not return. The authentication architecture synchronized across all 3 agency feeds simultaneously, cleanly, without a single conflict flag. Cobalt Meridian was operational. Castellan found her afterward at the coffee station in the corner, the one that had been producing indifferent coffee all morning and showed no signs of improvement. He stood beside her, didn't speak immediately. She poured a fresh cup and waited. The annex, he finally said. I should have known it existed. You weren't briefed on the original program documentation, she said. You came in during the restructure. You worked with what you were given. I should have read the full history. Yes, she said. No softening, just fact. But most people don't read the full history of a program when they inherit it midstream. They work with the current state. It's a common failure and a serious one. You could have identified yourself at the start. I could have, she said again. The same answer she had given earlier. She let it sit for a moment before she continued. But you had a room full of people who were certain they understood the boundaries of this program, certain they knew who belonged inside it and who didn't. If I had walked into that room at 07:30 and told you I was a founding architect on a program you've been running for 3 years without knowing I existed, what would have happened? He considered this honestly. I would have pulled your credentials. Verification would have taken time we didn't have, and in the meantime, the 11 days of failed solutions would have continued, she said, and the mission window would have closed. She looked at him. The work needed to happen first. The credentials were always going to be there when you looked. He was quiet for a moment. Phantom, he said. She looked at him. That's the call sign attached to the original architecture team designation in the annex, he said. Yours specifically. Founding architect. Program designation. Phantom. She drank her coffee. It's accurate, she said. It is, Castellan agreed. Fitting for someone who built the foundation of a program from the inside and then disappeared before anyone knew she'd been there. She set down her cup, picked up the manila folder, now empty. The document it had held was on the table in the main room, being filed into the active program binder where it should have been filed 3 years ago. The program is operational, she said. No. That's what mattered. She walked toward the door of room 412. Where are you going? Castellan asked. There's another room, she said, without turning. There's always another room. The door of the SIF opened, then closed behind her. The security seal re-engaged with a sound like a held breath being released. Inside, 12 people who had spent 11 days trying to solve a problem sat with the operational system running clean on every screen, and the corrective protocol filed in the binder, and the slow, necessary understanding of what had just happened settling across the room like light through a window that, by design, didn't exist. She had built the foundation. She had returned to fix it when fixing was required. And she had done it from a chair against the wall with a manila folder and patience precise enough to wait for exactly the right moment. The protocol held. It always had. Subscribe to Code of Valor, where the person who built the system is sometimes the last one anyone thinks to ask.